As part of this series that we started a couple of weeks ago, today we are going to explore the process of dying and what happens after that. We already talked about the idea of reincarnation and the idea of karma. And today we are going to see how these two laws work. Because we said the idea of reincarnation is that there is a relatively permanent element in ourselves that we can call soul, which has repeated experiences in a body. And one of the ideas of this process is that the soul can learn and develop the potentialities that are in the soul. For example, the only difference between a person like the Buddha or any other enlightened being and ourselves is just that the Buddha actualized what he really is, and we are the same, but we don't know it. All that is a potential in ourselves, but we don't know it, or we are not aware of, or we have not tapped into it, depending how you want to see it. So it is through a process of repeated experiences that first we learn what this is about, then we learn what this is not about, and then finally we discover what reality is. Now, this whole process is guided by the law of karma, the law of cause and effect, which brings results to actions. And when the person begins to be able to learn from life, that person may discover or begins to discover what this is, as I was saying, and who we really are and who we are not. So the process of karma is the one that guides this learning. Now, how is this growth produced? What's the mechanism? I think we can see this in what happens after death. So to begin with, let us review the idea of the human constitution. These are all aspects of human beings. For example, we say there is a mental aspect in ourselves, the thinking process. There is an emotional aspect, all our emotions and feelings. There is a physical aspect, our sensations. Now, the three of them are not separate. It's not that we are three different people. The three of them are just aspects of ourselves. And there are many other aspects we are not aware of. There is a lot of activity that is subconscious or unconscious completely, and they are part of ourselves. And with some techniques you may become aware of. You know, some yogis in India, they train themselves to become aware again of the physiological processes so that they can stop their heart at will if they want to, or reduce the rate, or affect the digestion. For most of us, that is something that is behind the boundary of our consciousness. But if we wanted to, we could regain awareness of that. So there are also some aspects that are beyond our consciousness, which, you know, Jung used to call something like the super consciousness or supra-consciousness, something that is beyond. And this is what in religions sometimes is called spirit. Now, this spirit is the source of everything, so it's one, and all of us are expression of the same one spirit. Then we have the soul. The soul is the seat of our individuality, what makes us different from the others. And again, that different is relative. It seems that we are different, but we are just different reflections of one same consciousness or of one same source. And then we have what we can call mind and emotions this is our psyche. Yes. As in psychology, psyche. Then we have our body. So this is like sometimes it's called the mind-body complex. So this is what we are aware of, for the most part, about ourselves. We are aware of our mind, our emotions, our body. In theosophy, this is sometimes called personality, our personality. Now, as we saw, the process of reincarnation takes place. The entity that reincarnates is the soul. And in each life, the mind, body, and emotions are different and new. So the process of life and death, as we know it, belongs to this aspect of ourselves. So this is like a cycle. This aspect is beyond life and death. And that aspect is the one that is permanent or relatively permanent, because at a certain point in evolution, the person realizes that it's not an individual soul, but one with everything, and that soul also vanishes. In the sense of, it's an idea. Everything, you can see everything in the universe as an idea. We are individuals because we think we are, and we deeply believe it. Of course, my body is different from yours, but there is the psychological component that says that I'm separate from you. Just like the fingers, they are all different, separate, but they belong to the hand, and they are not really separate from them. So people who have a deeper insight, they can see that even though we seem separate and different, we are all part of one being. But anyway, the idea is that then life and death has place at the level of our body, emotions, and mind. So the first thing that happens, of course, is the death of the physical body. Our physical body, for some reason, stops working. In science, there is not a definition about what life is, because when we are alive, our body is working as a unit. And when we die, even if we don't die because there is any particular failure, sometimes people die even out of happiness or out of a deep sorrow. They were working perfectly, but then they die, and now that body that was working as a unity loses that common rule or law that was making all the cells work together. And now the cells, they are very much alive. When we say that our body dies, what we really say is that the cells begin to work separate by themselves. They become like individualities. They don't work together anymore. They are very much alive until they are not able to feed themselves without the system of the body, and the body dissolves. Now, what is this? What is this life that was there keeping everything as a unit and then is not, and death occurs? Well, science doesn't know. I don't think anybody knows. In Theosophy, we put a name on that, so it looks like we know. But the idea of prana, the idea is that life, in Hinduism, they call it prana. In Chinese philosophy, qi. The idea is that there is something that we call life, vitality, that is penetrating the whole universe and that has this ability to organize systems. So in Theosophy, it is said that life is a manifestation of the spirit. One of the qualities of the spirit is this thing that we call life. But again, to know what life is requires a perception, far higher than an intellectual perception. we can describe it, but to really understand what it is said that requires a deeper perception. But in any case, the idea is that the body dies, and what in this or last century we have in science a little of research about the near-death experiences. Before that research, in the Theosophical literature, it was always said that the first thing that happens when the physical body is dying is that there is a review of everything that happened in life. And this is something common in several traditions and even in normal experience. People say, I saw my life, passing through my eyes in 1 second. Even details that I didn't remember, I didn't know they were there. So the first thing that happens is this review of the whole life. And the idea is that in the moment, because of the shock of dying, of life departing, the brain unlocks all the memories that were locked up there. But there is something more. That's more or less what science would say, but there is something more. In Theosophy, it is said that at that moment, there is a fusion between the soul and the brain. It's like the barrier is down, and for a second, we can perceive life not from the personal point of view. When we are living, usually we perceive life according to how things affects us. If we don't like it, then we condemn whatever is happening. If we like it, then we say how great we are or whatever it is. So we usually perceive life in a very personal way. But the soul is beyond, if you see, the soul is beyond the mind as we know it, thinking, is beyond emotions, is beyond the body. The soul has the ability to see things as they really are, without any emotional reaction, without any attachment or conditioning. So at the moment of death, for a second or a few seconds, the brain consciousness becomes the consciousness of the soul. To put it in a simple way, it's a little more complex what is really going on there, but that's the basic idea. So the whole life is seen, and it is said that the brain consciousness understands why each thing happened in life. It's able to see it in an objective way, why the suffering, why the happiness, the effects of one's actions, what was wrong, what was right. But there is also a part of our consciousness that clings more to some memories than the others, because we have at the moment the two elements, the personal element and the soul element, if we want to call it that way. So it's the personal element seen from the point of view of the soul, but the personal element is still there. So there is like a clinging to or an attachment to a certain things. I don't know if I would call it attachment, but the personal element pays more attention to certain things. And those things that we pay more attention to will determine to a large extent what happens next. And why the personal element pays more attention to something or another depends on how much energy during our life we put in different aspects of life. So for example, if we were people that to us it was very important relationships, then at the moment of death, what happens in our relationships will stand out, in that review. Or if we were interested in things, we were too attached to things, car, money, position, fame, then the eyes of the personal consciousness will be, more fixed on that. Or in spiritual things, again, then the spiritual aspects will stand out. Now, as I said, that sets the tone of the state of consciousness with which the person goes into the following stages that we are going to see. This is why it is said that when a person dies in an accident or as a result of a suicide or in a very violent way, that really many times affects the post-mortem life, because the state of mind was a state of mind that was very disturbed. So that very state, it's not different from the way we go to sleep. You know, we go to sleep, if we are peaceful, chances are that we will have a peaceful sleep. If we are worried, our mind will keep working on that particular kind of state of mind, you know, and we will have dreams related to that, or not be able to really rest. So this is why it is said that it's very important to try to die in a peaceful way, to try to be okay or make peace with the life that we had, and you know, try to die in the best possible way. And this is why also many philosophers said, in order to have a right death, we need to have a right living. Because if we lead the right kind of life, we will die peacefully. And then the post-mortem processes will be very productive. But if we didn't have a good life, then we won't die in that state, and then the post-mortem processes will be not so productive. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So this is the first point, the point that the last moments are important. Now, the last moments will be the result of the kind of life that we led. And it is said in the Theosophical literature, and I think in several other traditions, that it is important that when the person dies, there is peace around, not screaming and crying aloud, because at the moment consciousness is going through this review, and all these violent or strong emotions are affecting the review, and that may affect the post-mortem life. Of course, some people don't have the chance of dying peacefully, and that's part of karma, you know, as we talked in the previous talk. And there is a purpose behind, and there is something that comes out of that. But ideally, we should try to do the best we can to ensure that the moment of dying is a peaceful moment, because it is a very sacred moment. We are too attached to our physical experience, mainly because it's the only thing we are aware of. So, you know, when a person dies, there is always, if it is a person that we love, there is always sadness and mourning. That's perfectly fine. But we should try to ensure that there are not too strong emotions around. Now, the person dies and goes through this review, and usually the near-death experiences reports come soon after the review, because, you know, many people say this tunnel, they see the tunnel, or they may see a person that receives them. The idea is that once that tunnel is crossed, there is no return. In terms of this, in Theosophy, when talking about the physical body, we say that the physical body has two aspects. What we could call the dense aspect, dense in the sense of the matter that we perceive with our five senses. And then there is also an etheric aspect. Etheric means there is like a subtle counterpart of the physical body, which is the one that serves as a vehicle for what we call life. You know, life is something that is not physical or objective. And then we have the physical body. How does something that is not physical interact with something that is physical? There is in some traditions, among them Theosophy, the idea of bridges. You need a bridge that shares both characteristics. It is still physical, but it is subjective. It's not so, you know, objective like the physical. So the etheric double helps bringing the vitality that is all around and making the connection to the physical body. And this is, most of the healing techniques are based on, the manipulation of this energy, and we can manipulate it partly because of the power of thought, and also partly because we have this etheric body that we can redirect the energy that is around. So the idea is that when the person goes beyond the tunnel or whatever they see, consciousness passes on to the etheric double, and have you heard about the silver cord? Like, there is a connection between the etheric double and the physical body that clairvoyants can see as a cord, silvery. So when that is cut, there is no return. And that's what happens when the person goes beyond, and consciousness now stays at the level of the etheric body, but the etheric body is not able to serve as a vehicle of consciousness. So what happens is that the person simply falls into unconsciousness. After this experience of the review and the tunnel, goes beyond and falls into unconsciousness. It is said in general for about 36 hours or so. After that time, or during that time, consciousness will move from the physical body to the emotional body, or sometimes called astral body. So let me draw here the different planes we are talking about. So we are aware of the physical plane, and then we have the emotional plane. This is just a diagram. The planes are all interpenetrating, but it's easier to see it in this way. So we have the physical consciousness, and then after the etheric unconsciousness, the person will wake up on the emotional plane, or astral plane. That's another name that is common in many traditions also. So this astral plane is not completely unknown to us. It is said that when we go to sleep, we are on this astral state of consciousness. Whether we remember it or not, that's a different thing. And when a person falls asleep, some people awaken on the astral plane, but they are like in a bubble. They are not aware of the surroundings, and they are in their own world. Many people are like that in the physical world. We are so self-centered that we are really in a bubble, and we barely notice other people, and our relationship to other people is only in terms of the effect that these other people produce on us, not on the person itself. So it's not, my point is that everything that is described on the other side, that sometimes it's said, is just a projection of what we are here. And that's very important, as we are going to see. But anyway, when some people go to sleep, some of them are in a bubble, and some of them are really aware of the astral plane, and there are activities that people do there. And some of the dreams are actually memories, fragmentary memories of what happens on the astral plane. And if a person close to you died, many people have the experience of talking to the person that died, because they both are on the same plane. When you go to sleep, your state of consciousness is on the same plane that a person when the person dies. Actually, in many cases, it is said that the relationship between people changes only in terms of the time that they are together. When both of them were alive, their relationship was on when they were awake, but when one dies, they keep on with their relationship, but at night, when the person goes to sleep, and many times they, if there is love between them, there is a possibility of a relationship. Now also, that's not necessary. It's a good thing for us, but it's not necessarily a good thing for the soul. At the beginning, it's normal, but the idea is that the soul of the person should keep moving on, and not clinging to the past relationships. There will be a further stage where there can be a much deeper relationship between people that love each other in a complete different way. We are going to deal with that next talk. But the idea now is that this astral plane, emotional plane, is not completely unknown to us. When a person dies, that person finds himself on the astral plane. Now, how much aware of this plane the person will be depends a lot on the person's spirituality. Because there is something that happens when we die with the astral body. The idea is that the astral body has the astral plane has subplanes, 7 subplanes. These subplanes mean different qualities of matter. Just as on the physical plane we can say, well, there are solids, there are liquids, there are gases. They are all physical matter, but they have different properties. So in the same way, we can say there are like 7 kinds of astral matter. The physical matter is good, for example, to create a chair, not the gases or the liquid. So there are certain kinds of astral or emotional matter that are good for certain things, and different kinds that are good for different things. Since we are talking about an emotional plane, we are talking about different kinds of emotions. So emotions that have to do with the most selfish and instinctive or animalistic aspect of ourselves can only be expressed through the lower subplane, the more dense kind of emotional matter. And the most spiritual emotions can be expressed through the highest subplane. So the idea is that every time we feel something, we put in vibration some of these subplanes. The more we feel on a particular subplane, the more we attract similar kind of matter. So the feeling is to the astral body what eating is to the physical body. So we actually create our emotional body or astral body with what we feel. And if we give, a lot of energy to a particular kind of feelings, that feeling will be predominant in our astral body. Now, during life, all these vibrations are mixed, around all our astral body. But at death, there is like a rearrangement in layers, where the densest layers arrange themselves on the outside and the subtlest on the inside. So what this produces is that the person can be aware only on a subplane that is related to the outer layer of his astral body. So the point is, if a person had during life a lot of selfish and violent and cruel emotions, when this rearrangement happens, that person will be in touch only with, for the time being, only with the lowest subplane, because that's the part of his emotional body that can respond to what is outside. If a person doesn't have that kind of matter, then that person will not be aware of that lowest subplane at all, because that matter is like if it were your senses. So what happens is that the lowest subplane, which is related only to these very cruel emotions, it's a subplane with a high amount of suffering, with a lot of suffering. And that's what in many religions they call hell. When a person has fed himself with these kinds of emotions and dies, he awakens on that very low subplane of the astral plane, and he lives for a while amid all this suffering and violent emotions, and also on the astral plane emotions and thoughts, they take a form. So many times all these violent emotions will take forms as if they were, demons or things like that. So people actually feel like they are in hell. For most people, we are not even aware of that subplane if we don't have that kind of emotion, and it has to be predominant. We all get angry at some point, but we are talking about that kind of matter was a constant part of the astral body. Then a more spiritual person is not even aware of that, will never perceive that lower state or lower subplane of the astral body. Now, the person that is aware of that will stay there until this outer layer, little by little, loses the energy and begins to disperse. When this outer layer breaks down, then the next one will be exposed. And then now the person will be aware on the next subplane. Now, it is said that the second subplane, if we count, from the bottom up, is like the astral counterpart of the physical world. A person that is aware on that subplane could be here, seeing everything the same way that we see it. And there are many stories of people that died, they don't know that they are dead, and they try to communicate with people and they don't understand why, their husband or sons, they are not responding to them. Those people are on the second subplane, where the world is, to their eyes, is just the same, but they don't understand how this doesn't work. For the older people, if you saw Ghost, this movie, he was in that subplane and trying to communicate with his wife. So people are aware on this subplane only if they were very attached to the physical plane. Again, if we are not very attached, we are not going to be aware of this subplane. So, but those who the physical plane and physical pleasures and physical activities were the whole of their life, they will be naturally aware there. And it's also a kind of a painful state, because they cannot communicate with people. They crave to doing things. For example, if they like drinking, or they like anything that can be only satisfied on the physical plane, they cannot do it anymore. They don't have a physical body anymore. The desires, all the desires that we have, will still be there, and they will be even stronger, because all the desires are originated on the astral plane. When they are conveyed to our brain, a lot of the energy of the astral plane is spent in trying to move the heavy physical, matter. So we feel, while on the physical body, emotions in a far less, acute way than on the astral plane. And that's why many times in dreams you can feel in a very strong way. Or sometimes when during the passage to going to sleep or coming back, many times there are very deep emotions, because the consciousness is still on the astral plane. It's not completely on the physical plane. So what happens if we have a strong desire while in life? We are going to have that desire after death, but there will be no way to satisfy it, and it will be stronger. So this is why it is always recommended to try to work things on the physical plane. Because, for example, if you are attached to drinking, let's say, the only way you can stop drinking is by stopping drinking. You put away the drink, and then you have this desire and you have to enjoy it. And little by little, the desire fades away. Now, the same thing is what happens on the astral plane. When you are on the astral plane, you don't have a physical body. So the desire cannot be satisfied, and little by little, it will go away. But as I said, it is much more intense when that happens on the astral plane than when that happens on the physical plane. And on the physical plane, you can regulate it. You can say, okay, One day a week, if you are whatever you are working on, you can just drink a little or eat a little or whatever you are working on. There are more things that you can do. But on the astral plane, there is, no option. You just cannot satisfy that. And eventually that desire will fade away. And again, we are talking about very strong desires. That I don't think, we all have desires for physical things, but normally they are not really strong. When the person dies, for the most part, just forget it. But anyway, the second subplane is a plane that has a lot of suffering because a person is still bound to the physical plane. The person may see, her husband marry another person and get angry or whatever because they are really aware on this plane. Now, eventually, all that layer will also fade away and disappear, and the person will become aware on the next higher plane. Now, a spiritual person went through all these two planes in unconsciousness, unconscious. Now, the next two planes are said to be more or less similar to the one that is related to the physical plane, but the consciousness there is not so much looking backward, but is looking forward to the process. The person is trying to move on. And the way it is described is that it's usually kind of a boring plane. There is no active suffering, but the person is there, cannot do the things that he or she used to do, and doesn't know what to do. It sometimes happens with people who retire. If their whole life was just going to work, then they cannot work, and they say, okay, now what now? If they don't have any other interest. So these other two subplanes, people are more or less in that state. They don't know what to do. They don't have any further interest. They cannot do the things they were used to. So it's like a waiting room. Now, all this is related to what in Catholicism is called purgatory. Because the idea of purgatory is that the soul is still attached to the world, it still has sins, as they are called, is not pure enough to enter into heaven. So has to stay in purgatory, undergoing a process of purgation, of purification, which is exactly what is happening here. Little by little, all these layers of the astral body, because they cannot be fed, they will disappear. So then we come to the fifth subplane, which is said to be what most normal or the normal religions call heaven, but heaven in a very material sense. There is a description of heaven as being a city with streets of gold, and very material conception of heaven in Christianity, and there is also a very spiritual conception of heaven. So you have different conceptions. Or in other traditions, where even with some native people, they would talk about these prairies with a lot of sun and animals. It's the idealized physical life for a person that is not spiritual enough, to be beyond the physical life. So it's not a subplane that has much suffering. That's why, it can be felt by a person like a kind of heaven, but it's a very immature or basic heaven. It's just, as I said, a material idealization of what life should be. And people there, it is said that they gather together, they build churches. On the astral plane, things or the matter follows thought and emotions. So it's very easy to generate forms on the astral plane. So they are perfectly these kind of people who are, good people, but not necessarily very spiritual. They are happy in their heavens. And usually that takes place on the fifth subplane. Then on the 6th, which is higher, it is said that there are many people who had a more abstract desire in life, like artists, for example. Artists that are not necessarily spiritual. This plane, the emotional plane, has very little to do with spirituality. Most people who are aware on the emotional plane are people who are not deeply or very spiritual. They are good people, but not necessarily too spiritual. So these artists that are more based on or focused on not art as a spiritual expression, but more as a sensual expression, many of them are aware on the 6th subplane, and the clairvoyants can see that. They say it's a beautiful plane. It's probably the most beautiful plane on the astral plane. But all these descriptions, the thing is that after the astral plane comes what we could really call heaven, a spiritual heaven, where there is a state of unity and bliss, a really transcendental state. So when you compare that state with any on the astral plane, even on the higher subplanes, it's like, to be content with a very little thing when you can have something much deeper. So this 6th subplane is said to be, a beautiful subplane, and there is pleasure there, but is something still very narrow. And on the 7th, it is said that there are many people who were highly intellectual, more interested in concepts, but again, not necessarily spiritual. Intellectual people, which were still selfish or not necessarily spiritual. So that's a brief description. Of course, the subplanes are much more complex. I'm just giving a brief description. And the whole process is that the astral body begins to purify, and consciousness begins to let go progressively of the denser attachments. Now, a spiritual person may go right through all the astral plane without any consciousness and awaken on the next plane, which in Theosophy, and we are going to discuss this in the next teaching, in Theosophy is sometimes called Deva Chan. Deva is gods, Chan is plane, or place, so the place of the gods. Is symbolical, the name. It's what, the spiritual heaven in religions. In Hinduism, they call it sometimes Sukhavati. Well, there are different names. But we are going to deal with this in the next talk. The idea here with the emotional body is that, or the emotional plane, is that a spiritual person can go through it in very few hours or in a few years, according to how much matter of this subplane, or how active the matter of these subplanes were in himself. We all have different matter on the astral plane, but if our consciousness was not too stuck or attached to it, then when after death, the consciousness is not aware, because it's not even trained to perceive through that matter. But people who their consciousness during life was very much based on emotions, and emotions, not necessarily spiritual emotions, are fine. Love, compassion. When I say attached to emotions, I mean the lower attachments. Then they can stay for 100 years or 500 years on the astral plane. It depends on how attached they were, and depends on many other things. But they can be a long time there, which more spiritual people just go fast through it and spend more of their time on Devachan, which is the place where the soul can really grow. All the astral plane was a process of purification, preparing consciousness to be reborn in this state of Devachan, which is where the assimilation of all the experience in life will take place. So the really important aspect of the afterlife takes place on Devachan. But before going there, nothing can enter on Devachan that is not spiritual, using the word spiritual in a wide sense. So before being able to awaken on Devachan, this process of purification has to take place. So it is important that, for example, Socrates said that the aim of a philosopher is to prepare himself for death. In this sense, is to lead the right kind of life so that after death, you don't spend any time here and you go straight to that state of growth, of bliss, of unity, which is the aim for the process of incarnation. Because we can learn many things while we are alive, but most of the learning, the growth, the understanding happens on the higher plane, in the Devachan after death. Life is like if you are fishing, it's just catching the fish. And then Devachan is eating the fish and digesting it. And then once that is done, a new incarnation happens. So that's more or less what I wanted to share with you tonight. And then, as I said, next week we'll go on with the process. Is there any comment or questions? Wait for the mic. Yeah, Michael was first. Yeah, Michael was first.
Yes, when you said that on the emotional astral plane, the more you're attached to the physical plane, the longer time you spend on the astral plane. Mm-hmm. But is that relative? Because doesn't time pass differently on the astral plane?
Yeah, the perception of time on the astral plane and the mental plane is different. And when we talk about time, we are talking about how it would be in terms of the physical time. A person who is clairvoyant can see when a soul died and when the soul incarnated again, and can say, okay, since the death to the incarnation, X amount of years passed. But then the experience of the soul while going through all those years may be completely different. Now, if we look at what happens with our emotions while alive, usually the psychological time or the psychological perception of time depends on what kind of emotions we are having. So when we are having a bad, a negative emotion, time seems to go really slow. When we are having a great time seems to go faster. So my guess is that the experience on the lower subplanes of the astral plane may seem to last an eternity for the person. And I guess that's why in some religions they talk about hell as something that is eternal, when from the point of view of most religions in the world and in Theosophy also, there is nothing eternal in these processes. They are, they have a particular amount of time and they have a particular purpose.
I'm interested in learning more about your understanding of the consciousness you were describing right before the moment of death, that kind of overview. St. Francis said he had practiced dying every night so he could commune with God. And it's my understanding, even in Socrates, he wasn't necessarily talking about death at the end, but the replication of that consciousness prematurely, before death itself. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested in the relationship specifically between that consciousness and hallucinogens. Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, and Aldous Huxley and some others actually used EKG machines and other things to hook up people who were on hallucinogens to EKGs, and they found their consciousness analogous to Buddhist monks. But one step further, just recently, they found that 2% of people in the population in the United States have enough DMT naturally occurring in their brain to achieve that consciousness. And some autopsies have shown that some of the people we consider some of the more spiritual people are the people with this 2% higher DMT. And some people are even saying that it relates to the idea of race, that those people with the 2% are of the new race and the people without are still remnants of the old race. But I'm interested in knowing more about that consciousness, its relationship to hallucinogens and its relationship with spiritual progress before death. If there's a question in there.
Yeah. Usually the idea is that all these states of consciousness are available to human beings. I mean, the soul in itself is a source of wisdom, and we all have that source of wisdom in us. The problem is that we don't know how to access it. So by using certain chemicals, you can open certain doors artificially, but that doesn't help in the evolution of the person at all, in the sense that, yes, we all have. It's like if you are trying to write, to learn how to write, and I write for you. You know, I grab your hand and I write for you. That is not really helping you. So what you have to learn is to do it by yourself. So through certain drugs, we probably can access some higher states of consciousness, but that is only producing an experience, you know, that the person may enjoy or not. But what you really need to do is to learn how to access it without an artificial help. So, because in life, we need to be able to live constantly on that state. And the problem with the drugs is that because they force the opening of these doors, eventually they break down certain mechanisms. There is like a veil that separates the normal awareness from the awareness of the higher planes. And that veil is usually a protection, because most people are not ready to be aware on the physical plane of the other planes, because we are vibrating with our emotions, with the emotional body, and we attract the kind of energies and entities that are in tune with our emotions. So in people that are still caught in negative emotions and selfishness and all that, they tend to attract entities from the lower subplanes of the astral plane. So when you open up the door to the astral plane, what most people encounter is all these entities that begin to be more a curse than a blessing to the life of the person. So this veil, this astral veil, protects the person until the person is pure enough to be able to go through the veil without breaking it, and then that means that consciousness is able to perceive on the higher aspects of the astral plane. Because the veil, to put it as an image, like the veil has really small holes. So the grossest consciousness cannot go through it. If you want to go through it, you have to break it. Now, as consciousness becomes subtler and subtler, then it is able to go through the pores of the veil without breaking it. And that's only possible when consciousness is subtle enough. So the drugs, little by little, break the veil. And when the veil is torn, that can be very bad for the person. So usually in the Theosophical tradition, it's not recommended. But there are some practices that you can do to replicate this state of consciousness before death, which were actually promoted by the Greeks, by Pythagoras and Plato. Pythagoras used to advise a person to go to a review before going to sleep of everything that happened in the day. So you go through this review and you notice everything that happened, how you reacted, and you try to see objectively at it and try to learn the lesson from that. And that's the last thing that you should do before going to sleep. And then when you go to sleep, you have the feeling of letting go. This is the end of this day. I'm done with this. I'm not clinging to any experience. And all that is a very, very good training. And some people because this is recommended also in some theosophical literature. So within the TS, some people practice it. And actually, when the person dies, goes to sleep in that way, it is said that consciousness can do the same that happens after death. Instead of staying on the astral plane, it can go right to the level of the soul, and that's what in Hinduism they call turiya, or a deeper state of consciousness than the one with dreaming and all that.
Okay, can you touch on what happens when a loved one dies and then they visit us, or we get a feeling, or we hear something?
Mm-hmm. There are two ways to be communicating with a person after the person died, according to where the person is. We are going to see in the next talk when the consciousness of the person is on this plane, on Devachan, that person cannot communicate to the physical plane anymore. But any of us, when we go to sleep, because of what I just said, can become aware on the Devachanic plane and be in touch with this person. Now, most people, now I don't know if most people, but many people are aware on some of these planes, on the astral plane, some of these subplanes. So when we go to sleep, sometimes we can communicate with the person there. I guess it is usually normal that at the beginning, soon after the person died, there is more a tendency to get in touch, with people who are alive. But as I said, the idea is that the soul should not be constantly looking back. It should look forward. And then once the soul is in Devachan, we have in Devachan, we have, let's suppose these are the souls of people. This is the soul of a person who just died, doesn't have any physical body, and is on the Devachanic plane. And this is the soul of a person, a loved one, that is living in the physical plane. So the soul is expressing itself through the physical plane, through the physical body of the person, but can also express and have a relationship at the level of the soul, let's say, with the person that died. And it is said to be a far deeper relationship. So rather than the soul trying to communicate with this soul through the physical body, the soul is able to communicate directly with the soul, even if the physical body is, completely unaware of that. So a person in Devachan may be there with all his or her loved ones, even if they are still alive, but they actually have a relationship on a higher plane. So, it's fine. It's fine to have this kind of communication, but I don't think we should cling to them. Let them, if they happen, they are natural, but let them, move forward to a deeper and higher relationship.
Earlier on, we talked, you had talked about how the physical consciousness becomes in contact with the soul consciousness at the moment of death. And there's some type of communication or some type of exchange, and at the point where all the events of the lifetime flash through. So, and then later on, we talked about in Devachan is that there's an evaluation of the life. So I guess when and how does that information get transmitted from the physical into the soul and make it all of its way up there to the final point where it's evaluated in Devachan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is, as we are going to see in the next talk, there is a second death, what is called the second death. That is when the person drops the emotional body and is born into Devachan. Now, at the moment of dropping the emotional body, there is a second review. Now, this review, it's more selective. Only the things that are in tune with that high state of consciousness will be seen and retained. So the person in Devachan works on the spiritual essence of every experience, and will never remember anything that is not spiritual. So if the person had a very bad relationship with somebody else, in Devachan that somebody else won't exist. I'm going to explain the whole thing there, because these are all subjective states. You know, as you can see, life itself is subjective also. And in Theosophy, this plane is called the plane of causes, or the world of causes, and these are the world of effects. These are, you know, we ate on the physical plane, and then now we are digesting whatever we ate. So physical life is very important in that sense. When you really assimilate, it's after death, but you will assimilate what you ate. So according to how you lived your physical life is what you can assimilate later on. Now, without assimilation, eating will have no meaning. So without this post-mortem process, life doesn't have any meaning. But we are going to deal with that next talk. I'll address that. For the time being, the first review has it produces an impression in consciousness that will be retained, but also it will determine, it's like it activates more whatever layer of the astral body of the person is related to the most important. Remember that I said there is a review and there are some things that stand out. And those things that stand out are the ones that the consciousness is identified with. If the person was really attached to physical pleasures, then that produces like a vitalization of the outer layer of the astral body, and then that will determine where the person is aware. So it's a natural process that happens, you know, and consciousness clings to whatever was more important, and that will affect the life on the astral plane. But then those impressions are retained for the second review. I'll talk about that later. I think Ed had something.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were talking about the second level of the astral plane, where you have these desires that can't be fulfilled, it's sort of like the phantom limb syndrome, where you've lost a limb, but you still feel you have it, and then it starts itching, and then you can't scratch it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like Pirates of the Caribbean, when Barbossa and his pirate friends they could eat an apple, but they didn't taste it. So.
Mm-hmm.
How much guidance, if any, do we get during that whole process?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any information about that?
Yes, there is, and it depends a lot on the receptivity of the person also. You know, in daily life, we many times see people that may not be doing something good, and we may go and try to guide them, and they won't accept any kind of guidance. So something like that happens also on the other side. But it is said that there are entities, just because, you know, awakening on the astral plane is also a process of birth or rebirth on a different plane. So there are people that receive the new soul, or entities that receive the new soul. We can call them angels or devas or however we want to. And usually the consciousness of the person will shape, because it doesn't know the entity is, but will shape that entity into whatever that person is familiar with, either a loved one or Jesus or Krishna. I read of a little girl that didn't have any religious background, and she had a near-death experience, and she saw a beautiful butterfly that came to greet her. So our consciousness will shape those entities in a particular way, but there are entities that are receiving the people. Now, it happens that many times when the person falls into unconsciousness and awakens on the astral plane, it's not receptive to any help from outside. It is said also that there are people who go to sleep and that they have experience on the astral plane, and many times they try to help people who just died. And there is a book by Leadbeater. He was a member of the Theosophical Society, the early member, and a very good clairvoyant. And he describes in this book, it's called Invisible Helpers. And he says, many people who in daily life have an intention of helping others in whatever way they can, when they go to sleep and they are awake on the astral plane, they naturally tend to do the same. And they get together with other people, and one of the things that some people do is to help to go greet the newly dead person, try to explain what the plane is about, So there is some help, but also how receptive people are to that depend on them. Some people are, if they are, really indoctrinated by a religion, and they wake up there and they think that's hell, or there is nothing you can do, and you can go try to help them, and they will interpret that you are Satan or whatever. People, when we die, all that happens is that we lose a physical body, but we are still the same as we are here. We are still with our prejudices, if we are aware on the astral plane. Our prejudices, our reactions. So that's why the wrong teachings can be very harmful on the other side. Many people are completely lost on this, if they are not aware on the lower two planes, but are aware on the next two. They say, well, if this is hell, this is not too bad. If this is heaven, this is not good at all. So they are completely lost what is going on, And, yeah.
Okay, any more questions? Yes, wait.
Wait for the mic so that people on the internet can hear you.
When you talked about...
Now you have to use
okay, because I'm nervous.
I know.
I just bought tickets to see Long Island Medium in March. So how would my loved one come through if you're saying let them go on?
Yeah, well, that was historically a point of contention between spiritualists and theosophists. What Blavatsky and the early founders of the Theosophical Society said, and we are going to see this in our next meeting, but they say when these layers of the astral body are left behind, they form, the consciousness of the person keeps moving to higher planes, and all this leftover, emotional leftover, forms what is called in Theosophy a shell. Now that shell is a bundle of memories and emotions, and usually it's floating on the astral plane, kind of inert. But when they are attracted to a person through mediumship, they can be attracted, and when that shell gets in touch with the intelligence of the medium, it can talk as if it were the person. And actually, it has all the memories there, but mainly the lower memories. That person will talk about the football team, and how he enjoyed this food, and all this thing, because it's more like an echo. So Blavatsky always said, in very rare occasions, you really communicate with the soul. And when you do it, generally speaking, it's not really good unless the soul really has a problem that needs to communicate with the physical plane in order to move on. But Blavatsky says, you will be in touch with something that is not necessarily your loved one. My advice to you would be just go with an open mind and see. Life after death is also very complex. And what I'm giving is the general rules. But there is a whole explanation that kind of communication is not really with the soul of the person. But go and see. Go and see. If you are already decided, have the experience and then see.